The video game club president tore up my strategy notebook and called me a faker who'd never understand their favorite game. They had no idea. My dad was the lead designer. The video game club president tore up my strategy notebook and called me a faker who'd never understand their favorite game. They had no idea. My dad was the lead designer. School bullies made fun of me when I wanted to join their video game club. They didn't know my dad designed the game. I stood outside the computer lab clutching my worn notebook full of fan theories and character builds for this game. Let's call it Eternal Kingdoms, that I'd been playing since I was 8. The video game club was meeting after school, and I'd finally worked up the courage to join, just wanting to talk to other people who loved the game as much as I did. My dad always encouraged me to make friends who shared my interests, but I never mentioned that he was the lead designer because that felt like cheating somehow. The club president, a kid named Grayson with an Eternal Kingdoms hoodie with one of my dad's drawings on it, looked up when I walked in and said, "This is a closed club meeting," even though the poster said new members were welcome. When I explained I wanted to join because I loved Eternal Kingdoms, he laughed and turned to the others. "Right, another faker who thinks pretending to like our game will make him cool. You probably just watched some YouTube videos and think you know everything." My face burned, but I opened my notebook to show them my character builds, hundreds of pages of strategies I'd developed over the years. Grayson grabbed it from my hands and started reading my notes in a mocking voice to the whole club. "Listen to this. He thinks the Shadow Knight can be optimized with intelligence stats. That's literally the stupidest build I've ever heard." The other kids laughed even though I'd discovered that build myself, and it actually worked perfectly. When I tried to explain the strategy, a kid named Greg cut me off. "Dude, you're trying way too hard. We get it. You have no friends and you're desperate to fit in somewhere, but lying about understanding advanced mechanics is just sad." Another kid, Adam, added, "He probably plays on easy mode and thinks he's good. My little sister could beat him." Grayson decided to test my knowledge with rapid-fire questions about obscure lore, but when I answered them all correctly, he got angrier instead of impressed. "You just memorized the wiki. Anyone can do that," he said. "Real players actually understand the game, not just regurgitate facts like some kind of autistic robot." Greg laughed and added, "Look at how he won't make eye contact." The personal attacks escalated when Adam pointed at my stomach. "No wonder you play video games all day. You're too fat to do anything else. When's the last time you went outside?" Grayson joined in. "He probably sits in his mom's basement eating chips and pretending he has friends online." When I quietly said I just wanted to talk about the game with other fans, Grayson mimicked me in a high-pitched voice. "I just want friends. Please like me." He turned to the others and said, "This is what happens when socially retarded kids think they can hang with normal people." Greg pretended to be me trying to talk to a girl, acting out an exaggerated, awkward conversation that ended with, "Want to see my Eternal Kingdoms collection?" Grayson grabbed my backpack and dumped it out, my inhaler clattering across the floor. Of course he has an inhaler. Can't even breathe properly. He kicked it across the room while I tried to retrieve it, making me crawl after it while they laughed. Adam found my lunch money and pocketed it, saying, "This is a membership fee for wasting our time, fatty." When I finally grabbed my inhaler and stood to leave, Greg blocked the door. Grayson grabbed my notebook with all my game notes and started ripping pages out one by one. "Each page is worth $1. How much you got?" When I tried to save my notebook, Adam pushed me hard into a desk, my ribs hitting the corner painfully. "Stay down, Reddard. No one wants you here." Grayson pulled up the club's group chat on the projector and started typing a message about me. "Warning, weird fat kid trying to infiltrate our club. Probably a pedo or something. Do not interact." He took a photo of me on the ground and added it to the message. "There, now everyone knows to avoid you. You're banned from anything related to Eternal Kingdoms at this school. My brother works at the game company. I could get you IP banned from the game entirely." That night I told my dad everything, showing him my torn notebook and the bruise on my ribs. His face went dark in a way I'd never seen before. "We're going to take care of this," he said quietly. The next day, I watched from the hallway as my dad walked into the computer lab carrying a metal briefcase. Grayson's eyes went wide when he recognized him from gaming conventions. "Holy shit, that's David Volkner, the lead designer of Eternal Kingdoms." My dad smiled and opened the briefcase, revealing the only physical copy of Eternal Kingdoms 2 in existence. "I heard you guys have the best EK club in the state. Thought your club might want to be the first to play this." The room exploded. Grayson was practically crying, begging my dad to sign his hoodie. Greg was taking selfies. Adam kept saying this was the best day of his life. "Before we start," my dad said, "you guys know my son, right? He should be here for this." He turned to the door where I was standing. "Come on in, buddy." Grayson's hand froze mid-signature as I walked in. Greg's phone clattered to the floor. Adam's mouth hung open as my dad put his arm around my shoulders and said, "Give me one reason I shouldn't permanently ban all of you from the game." The silence stretched so thick you could cut it with a knife until the door banged open and Kirk Pearson walked in carrying his coffee mug. He stopped dead when he saw Dad standing there with the metal briefcase and me by the door, while Grayson's hand was still frozen mid-signature. "What's going on here?" Kirk asked, looking from Dad to the terrified kids to me. "This can't be a club activity without my approval." Dad closed the briefcase with a snap that made everyone jump. "Just showing the kids something," he said calmly. Kirk set his mug down and looked around the room more carefully, noticing the tension and fear on everyone's faces. "Everyone sit down right now," he said in his teacher voice that meant business. While the kids scrambled to their seats, Dad bent down and started picking up the torn pages of my notebook scattered across the floor. I walked across the room to grab my inhaler from where it had rolled under a desk, my ribs aching with every movement. Kirk watched me move stiffly, and his eyes narrowed. "What happened to you?" he asked, pointing at how I was holding my side. "You need to report this to the office immediately." Grayson jumped up from his seat. "It was just jokes, Mr. Pearson. We were just protecting the club from posers who don't really know the game." Dad stood up holding the torn pages and looked at Kirk. "This needs to go through through proper school channels, not threats about game bans. My chest started getting tight from all the stress, and I fumbled with my inhaler, taking 2 quick puffs while everyone watched. Kirk's face got serious when he saw me struggling to breathe. "I'm calling the nurse right now," he said, picking up the classroom phone. While Kirk dialed, Dad pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the projector screen that still showed the group chat with all the messages about me. He was careful to zoom in on just the text, not catching any of the kids' faces in the photos. "How do I submit this evidence to the administration?" Dad asked Kirk when he hung up the phone. Kirk looked at the screen, and his face went pale when he read the messages calling me names and threatening me. "We need an emergency meeting with administration," Kirk said, dialing the front office. "Yes, this is Kirk Pearson. I need to schedule an urgent meeting for tomorrow morning about a serious bullying incident." After he hung up, he turned to us. "Let's go before this becomes more of a scene." Dad picked up my torn notebook and the briefcase while I grabbed my backpack, and we left the lab with all the kids still sitting there in shocked silence. At home that night, Dad made us both hot chocolate, and we sat at the kitchen table. "I'm worried everyone's going to see me as the kid who needed his dad to fight his battles," I said, staring at my mug. Dad rubbed his face with both hands. "I shouldn't have done that stunt with the game. It was emotional and unprofessional. We need to handle this the right way now." His phone rang, and he looked at the caller ID with a frown. "It's Leroy Holland from HR," he said before answering. I could hear Leroy's voice through the phone telling Dad he couldn't threaten IP bans or bring unreleased builds to schools without permission. "There could be disciplinary action if you don't follow company policy from here on," Leroy said loud enough for me to hear. Dad apologized and promised to follow proper procedures, then hung up and looked at me. "What do you actually want from all this?" he asked. "Do you want to feel safe at the school, get your lunch money back, or be able to join the club?" He leaned forward. "I want you to decide your own goals here, not just react to my anger about what happened." I thought about it while sipping my hot chocolate, then went to my room and started organizing all the evidence on my phone. I took screenshots of the group chat that Greg had posted on his Instagram story earlier that day, showing all the messages about me. I photographed each torn page of my notebook, making sure the timestamps were visible. I pulled up my game history on the Eternal Kingdoms website, showing I'd been playing since I was 8 years old with thousands of hours logged. I created a folder on my phone called Evidence and another backup on my laptop, making sure everything was organized by date and type of incident. What's making Grayson so defensive about his club? Is he really that worried about fakers? Or is something else going on here? The way he immediately shut down a new member when the poster says everyone's welcome makes me wonder if there's more to his gatekeeping than just protecting the game's reputation. My phone buzzed around 11 that night with a message from an unknown number. It was Ignacio from the club saying he felt bad about not speaking up when they were pushing me around. He typed out this long message about how he saw them take my lunch money and shove me into the desk, but was too scared to say anything. He wasn't sure if he could officially report it, but wanted me to know he felt guilty. I saved the message to my evidence folder and went to bed feeling slightly less alone. The next morning at the school was weird. Kids I'd never talked to before were staring at me in the hallways. Some sophomore I didn't know called me a snitch when I walked past his locker. Another group was saying I was going to get the whole school banned from playing Eternal Kingdoms. By second period, the story had changed into me threatening to sue everyone or my dad buying the school or something equally stupid. Between classes, Joey Banks, the guidance counselor, pulled me out of math and brought me to her office. She had this big map of the school on her desk and started marking different routes I could take between classes to avoid running into Grayson and his friends. She circled the teachers I could go to if I felt unsafe and arranged for me to sit on the opposite side of the room in the 2 classes I shared with Greg. She wrote it all down on this official-looking form and gave me a copy. After that meeting, she sent me to the nurse who took photos of the bruise on my ribs from when Adam shoved me into the desk corner. The nurse measured it with a ruler and wrote down all the details in her report. She gave me a note saying I couldn't do gym class for 2 weeks and told me to give copies of her documentation to anyone handling the complaint. Then I had to go see Herman Jensen, the school resource officer, in his tiny office next to the main entrance. He had me write out everything that happened from the beginning. He asked specific questions about the physical stuff, like exactly how hard Adam pushed me and whether I felt threatened when Greg blocked the door. He explained I could press charges for assault and theft, but said I should talk to my parents first before deciding. My phone dinged with an email during lunch, scheduling a disciplinary hearing with Vice Principal Lewis Douglas for Thursday. The email said all parents would be contacted and that everyone involved had to attend. I forwarded it to my dad, who just replied with a thumbs up emoji. Kirk Pearson, the video game club advisor, stopped me after school to say he'd filed his report. He'd gone through all the club paperwork and discovered something interesting. The charter they filed with the school never actually said anything about membership requirements, even though their poster said it was selective. This meant they'd violated school policy by refusing to let me join. He said this would definitely come up in the investigation. That evening, Ignacio texted me again. He said Grayson always bragged about his brother working at the game company, but nobody had ever seen proof. Ignacio had been in the club for 2 years, and Grayson never once showed any insider info or early access to anything. He said he'd write a statement about what he saw if he didn't have to face them directly. The next day, Vice Principal Douglas called me to his office to explain how the hearing would work. He went through all these rules about confidentiality and said if anyone harassed me online about this situation, they'd face additional consequences. He seemed pretty serious about the whole thing. That night, while we were eating dinner, Dad's phone rang. It was Greg's parents, and I could hear them yelling through the phone about how Dad had humiliated their son. They kept using words like inappropriate and lawsuit until Dad cut them off. He told them to contact the school administration and hung up. The next morning, Dad's laptop pinged with an email from Leroy Holland, his boss at the company. me, and I watched his face go pale as he read it on his phone at breakfast. He forwarded it to me without saying anything, and I saw the subject line said, "Immediate action required, unreleased build security breach." And the message was all about company policy violations and how Dad couldn't threaten customers with bans and had to return the prototype immediately. My stomach twisted, knowing I'd gotten Dad in trouble at work just because some kids were mean to me. He drove to the office that morning to return the game while I went to the school early to avoid the main hallway rush. Between first and second period, I had to use the bathroom, and when I came out, Adam was waiting by the water fountain. He slammed his shoulder into me so hard I hit the lockers and my books scattered everywhere. No teachers were around, and he walked away laughing while I picked up my stuff and wrote down the time and place in the safety notebook Joey had given me. I took the long way around the gym for the rest of the day, even though it made me late to math class. During lunch, my phone buzzed with notifications from the group chat someone had added me to, and there was my photo from the computer lab floor with new captions about being a crybaby who needed Daddy to fight his battles. I screenshotted everything, including the timestamps and usernames, then sent them to Joey and Herman right away. Herman must have acted fast because 20 minutes later, I saw him walking Greg, Grayson, and Adam toward the office through the cafeteria windows. Later, Joey told me Herman had pulled them from class to explain harassment laws and what happens when people retaliate against someone who reports bullying. The boys kept saying it was all just jokes, and I was being too sensitive according to what Joey heard from the secretary. That afternoon, Joey met with me in the counselor's office and taught me specific ways to handle these situations, like keeping my responses super short, knowing when to walk away versus when to stand my ground, and recognizing when things were about to get worse. She showed me how to document everything properly and gave me alternate routes through the building to avoid problem spots. Her practical advice helped way more than people just telling me it wasn't fair or that the bullies were wrong. The next day at lunch, I was eating alone when Ignacio from the video game club sat down across from me. He didn't really say much for about 5 minutes, just sat there eating his sandwich. But then he pushed a folded paper across the table. "I wrote down what I saw," he said quietly, "for the hearing thing. I don't want to talk in front of everyone, but they can read this." He got up and left before I could thank him properly. By Thursday, the whole video game club got suspended pending the investigation, and suddenly kids who never cared about me before were glaring in the hallways. Someone wrote "snitch" on my locker in Sharpie, and a girl from the club told me I ruined everything for everyone just because I couldn't take a joke. More kids started avoiding me at lunch and in class, moving their desks away or finding different lab partners. Dad came home that night looking tired and said he'd returned the prototype to company storage and apologized to Leroy for using company property inappropriately. He said Leroy understood once he explained the situation, but there would still be a review about the incident. I felt awful that my problem was affecting his job, but he just ruffled my hair and said protecting me was more important than any game. 2 weeks later, the letter came about the disciplinary hearing scheduled for Monday morning. Vice Principal Lewis Douglas would run it with Kirk attending as a witness, and Dad could come as my support person. My hands shook as I read the letter 3 times. Monday came too fast, and I sat in the conference room with Dad beside me while we waited for everyone else to arrive. Kirk gave me a small nod when he walked in with his notepad. Douglas sat at the head of the table looking serious with a thick folder in front of him. Grayson, Greg, and Adam came in with their parents, who all looked angry at me, not their kids. Douglas started by asking me to explain what happened in my own words. My voice cracked at first, but I forced myself to keep going, telling him about wanting to join the club, getting pushed down, having my inhaler kicked away, and Adam taking my lunch money. I showed him my bruised ribs in the nurse's photos and handed over the torn pages from my notebook. Then we submitted our evidence folder with all the screenshots from the group chat, the timeline I'd documented of Adam shoulder-checking me and Herman's incident reports. Ignacio's written statement was in there too, describing exactly what he saw that day in the computer lab. Douglas read through everything while Grayson's mom kept sighing loudly. When it was their turn, Grayson said I was exaggerating everything and couldn't handle normal teasing. Greg claimed I just memorized stuff from wikis and didn't really understand the game, so they were testing my knowledge. Adam said the physical contact was accidental and I was clumsy anyway. Douglas looked at his notes for a long minute before announcing the consequences. Grayson had to pay back $30 for my lunch money plus $20 for a new notebook. Greg owed $15 for the torn pages he helped destroy. Adam had to return the exact amount he took from my pocket that day. All 3 got 2-week suspensions from any school club activities. They had to write formal apology letters that Douglas would review before accepting them. The school counselor would assign them each 10 hours of anti-bullying workshops spread over the next month. Kirk got instructions to revise the video game club charter with clear membership rules that couldn't exclude students without valid reasons. Grayson's mom kept shaking her head and muttering about unfairness while Greg's dad took notes on his phone. Vice Principal Douglas just laid down the law like a boss fight final phase. Suspensions, apology letters, anti-bullying workshops, the whole combo attack, while Grayson's mom acts like her precious son just lost his high score unfairly. Adam's parents just sat there looking tired. After the meeting ended, I heard kids in the hallway already spreading different versions of what happened. Some said I got the bullies off easy because my dad was important and threatened the school. Others claimed I used my connection to get them punished way harder than normal teasing deserved. By lunch the next day, I'd heard 5 different stories about the hearing, and none matched what actually happened. The rumors got worse when someone posted on the school message board that I was a snitch who couldn't handle jokes. Another person replied that the bullies deserved worse for what they did to me. The arguments went back and forth all week with people taking sides who weren't even there. 3 days into the suspension period, I tried going to the computer lab during club time just to show I cared about the game. Kirk was there organizing some paperwork and looked up when I walked in. He reminded me that all club activities were paused during the suspension, including regular meetings. Even when I explained I just wanted to practice strategies, he said the rules applied to everyone equally. I left feeling like even trying to belong somewhere got blocked, no matter what I did. The next morning, Kirk caught me in the hallway before first period and mentioned he could host informal strategy talks during lunch. He said it wouldn't be official club business, just students discussing game mechanics in his classroom. I agreed, even though I didn't expect much from it since nobody really wanted me around anyway. That first lunch session, only Ignacio showed up besides me and Kirk grading papers at his desk. I pulled out my rebuilt notebook and walked Ignacio through my Shadow Knight intelligence build, step by step. I showed him how stacking intelligence multipliers with specific armor sets created damage outputs nobody expected from that class. He actually followed the math and asked smart questions about skill rotations and stat priorities. We spent 40 minutes going through different scenarios, and he took notes on optimizing his own build. That evening, I logged into Eternal Kingdoms to test some theories we'd discussed at lunch. Within 5 minutes, my chat box filled with messages from usernames I recognized as local players. They called me names and said I ruined their friends' lives over a stupid game. More messages came flooding in saying I was trash at the game, and only one because of insider info. Instead of responding, I turned on my recording software and documented every message with timestamps and usernames. I took screenshots of the worst ones and saved the chat logs to a folder on my desktop. The harassment continued for 2 hours until I finally logged off and organized all the evidence into dated files. Dad found me organizing the screenshots and asked what happened, so I showed him everything. He called Leroy from HR at his company and put him on speaker to discuss options. Leroy said Dad should avoid any school appearances for now since it would make the situation worse. He mentioned that organized outreach programs might work once things cooled down in a few months. We both knew my reputation couldn't be fixed by big gestures or Dad showing up to defend me. 2 days later, an official letter arrived from Douglas detailing all the sanctions in writing. I read through the formal language about restitution amounts and workshop requirements and suspension dates. Near the bottom, I noticed it specifically said academic eligibility and athletic participation remained unaffected for all parties. The justice felt carefully limited to avoid any real consequences that might affect college applications or sports seasons. Kirk scheduled a charter revision session that week and posted flyers inviting student input about membership standards. I went, even though my stomach hurt from nerves, and suggested adding transparent criteria for joining. I wrote on the board that behavior expectations should be posted clearly, so everyone knew the rules. Kirk nodded and added my suggestions to his list, while a few other kids watched from their seats. The session lasted an hour, with Kirk taking notes about preventing discrimination and ensuring fair access for interested students. Friday after school, Adam found me at my locker with a crumpled $20 bill in his hand. He shoved it at me and muttered something about processing fees while looking at the ground. I took the money without saying anything and put it in my pocket while he walked away quickly. Monday morning, Greg was waiting by my homeroom door with a folded piece of paper in his hand. He shoved it at me without making eye contact, and I could see the school letterhead through the thin paper. I unfolded it and read his messy handwriting saying he was sorry for dumping my backpack and destroying my notebook pages. The words looked forced, and I could tell someone made him write specific things because he'd underlined personal property and inappropriate behavior like they weren't his own words. I folded it back up and put it in my folder with all the other documentation I'd been collecting. Joey called me to her office during second period and showed me a new seating chart for my classes. She'd moved me to spots near the door in every room and handed me a yellow hall pass card. This lets you leave 5 minutes early from any class near the computer lab, she explained while marking a map with highlighter. She traced different routes through the building that would let me avoid the main hallways during club meeting times. The card felt weird in my pocket, but knowing I could escape if I needed to made my chest feel less tight. Tuesday during lunch, Leroy showed me his phone where someone had posted a picture of one of my torn notebook pages. They'd cropped it to show just my Shadow Knight build notes and added text making fun of the strategy. The post already had dozens of likes and comments from kids at the school laughing about how dumb my ideas were. I screenshot everything and went straight to Herman's office, where he pulled up the school network logs on his computer. His fingers moved fast across the keyboard as he traced the IP address back to a school computer in the library. The timestamp showed it was posted during study hall, and the login matched Greg's student ID. Herman printed out all the evidence and called Vice Principal Douglas, who came down immediately. They had me write out a statement about the harassment, while Herman compiled the digital evidence into a report. Wednesday morning during announcements, they called Greg to the office, and I saw him walking past my classroom looking pale. Later, I heard from other kids that he got 3 days of in-school suspension, and his parents had to come pick up his phone. Douglas stopped by my class to tell me privately that any more incidents would mean longer suspensions or possible expulsion. Thursday at lunch, Ignacio brought a quiet kid named Walter to our table in the library. Walter barely talked, but he pulled out a notebook with his own Eternal Kingdoms strategies, and we spent the whole period comparing notes. We talked about damage calculations and optimal skill rotations, while Ignacio asked questions about the lore. It felt normal for once, just 3 kids discussing a game without any drama or threats. Walter said he'd been too scared to join the official club after hearing what happened, but he liked our small group better anyway. That afternoon, Dad came home from work with a thick envelope from his company's HR department. His face looked tired as he opened it and showed me me the official warning letter about inappropriate use of company property and unprofessional conduct affecting minors. The letter said the incident was documented in his permanent file, and any similar behavior would result in immediate termination. Dad signed the acknowledgement form without arguing and told me he deserved it for losing his temper. I felt sick knowing his job was at risk because of me, but he pulled me into a hug and said protecting me was worth any consequence. Friday morning, Kirk posted new rules for the video game club on the school website. The club now required official sign-ups with parent permission slips, and he would supervise every meeting as faculty advisor. The rules included a whole section about respectful behavior and consequences for harassment. I printed out the form and turned it in to Kirk, who nodded and added my name to the member list without saying anything. The first meeting under the new rules was that afternoon, and I sat in the back corner with my notebook closed. Grayson ran the meeting like he was reading from a script, calling on people by raising hands and keeping everything focused on the game. When someone asked about optimizing healing spells, I raised my hand and explained the math behind regeneration versus burst healing. Grayson thanked me formally and moved to the next topic without mentioning my dad or anything else. Most kids just ignored me, but a few nodded when my answer helped them understand the mechanics better. After the meeting ended and kids started leaving, Grayson walked over to my desk and stood between me and the door. "I'm not gonna touch you or your stuff," he said quietly while looking at the wall behind me. "But keep your dad away from here and we won't have problems." His voice was flat, but I could hear the threat underneath the words. I nodded and tried to move past him, but he didn't step aside for a few seconds, just long enough to make his point clear. I went straight to Joey's office and told her exactly what Grayson said and how he blocked my path. She typed everything into her computer and added it to my file, then showed me how the documentation system worked. "Every interaction gets recorded," she said while printing a copy for me. "Keep these interactions short and always have witnesses around when possible." I thanked Joey and headed to lunch, where I found Kirk and two other kids from my math class huddled around a laptop in the corner of the cafeteria. Why does Grayson think blocking the door and making threats is going to work out for him when everything's being documented now? The kids playing with fire after watching 3 people get suspended for similar behavior. Kirk waved me over and showed me they were stuck on the Crimson Tower raid in Eternal Kingdoms, the part where you need perfect timing between the tank and support characters. I pulled out my notebook with the Shadow Knight build notes that Grayson had torn up, but I'd rewritten from memory. The other kid, a quiet guy named Ignacio who always sat in the back of math class, leaned forward when I explained how the Shadow Knight's intelligence scaling could actually tank better than traditional builds if you use the right spell rotation. We spent the next 20 minutes setting up the strategy on Kirk's laptop, with me calling out the timing while Ignacio controlled the Shadow Knight and Kirk handled support. The cafeteria noise faded as we focused on the boss's attack patterns, dodging the fire waves and timing our counterattacks perfectly. When the boss finally fell and the victory screen appeared, Ignacio actually smiled for the first time I'd ever seen, his whole face lighting up as he high-fived Kirk. "That was sick," he said quietly, and I felt something warm in my chest that had nothing to do with forcing anyone to accept me. Over the next few days, our lunch group became a regular thing. Just the 4 of us crowded around Kirk's laptop, trying different challenge runs. 3 days later, I was walking to history class when I passed Greg standing outside the principal's office, complaining loudly to another kid about how his in-school suspension was making him fail chemistry because he couldn't do the labs. "This is such bullshit," he was saying. "My parents are gonna kill me if I have to repeat the class." I kept walking without slowing down, realizing I didn't actually care anymore about whether his punishment was fair or not. That afternoon, Dad got an email from the school asking if he'd come speak to the computer science classes about game design, but when he showed it to me at dinner, we both knew it was really about trying to smooth things over. Dad typed a polite decline, but offered to do a 15-minute virtual Q&A with clear boundaries about what questions he'd answer. "No personal stuff, no autographs, just talking about the technical side of game development," he said while setting up the parameters with the teacher. The Q&A happened the next week, and I watched from the back of the computer lab as Dad answered questions about coding and art design, keeping everything professional and brief. By the end of the term, I'd started going to club meetings again, but only once or twice a week, sitting in the back corner with my notebook and only speaking when someone directly asked me about strategy. Most of the original members avoided me, but a couple of neutral kids who joined after everything happened would sometimes ask genuine questions about character builds. One girl asked about the intelligence scaling I'd discovered and actually took notes when I explained it. Another kid asked if the Shadow Knight build worked in PvP too, and we had a normal conversation about the pros and cons. Walking past the computer lab one afternoon with a new notebook full of strategies for the upcoming expansion, I stopped for a second and looked through the window at the club meeting happening inside. Grayson was still president, still wearing his Eternal Kingdoms hoodie, still acting like he owned the place, but now there was a teacher sitting in the corner and a printed list of club rules posted on the wall. The game still felt like mine when I played it at home or during lunch with Kirk and Ignacio, even if the social space around it stayed complicated and weird. 6 weeks after Dad's confrontation in that same computer lab, I sat at my desk at home documenting another interaction with Adam for Joey's file, while Dad worked on expansion content in his home office. He'd gotten a formal warning from his company about the unauthorized reveal of Eternal Kingdoms 2, which meant no bonus this year and removal from all public-facing events. I'd learned that justice doesn't come in clean packages, just in small documented moments and careful boundaries. The club kept running under the new rules with mandatory teacher supervision. I had my small group of strategy friends who actually wanted to learn the game, and both Dad and I carried the weight of that day's consequences in different ways. But I was still playing the game I loved, still discovering new strategies, still filling notebooks with builds that actually worked, and that felt like enough. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you through all of this. It's been really interesting sharing these thoughts together. See you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.